Thank you. So we're going to start the talk, Anatomy of a Volto Project by Piero Nicoli. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. And thanks for attending this talk about the anatomy of a Volto project. What do I mean with this title? Basically, my goal here is to discuss how to tackle the development of a new Volto theme. So transforming what is a design, could be UI design especially, into a work plan. So I won't be showing any code here, just in case. Code is a detail, in my opinion. And so yeah, let's get to it. So this is what I'm going to show here is a complete, in-depth flowchart of what we usually do in order to complete the project. So we start from the design, we go through development, and then to deployment. Great work from, it's a great work from my flowchart team, right? I know. And so what we're going to focus on today is just the first two steps, and more specifically, the arrow between these two steps. So, because design is not my job, and usually not my, what I take, I usually receive the design, the complete design, and as I said earlier, the implementation and development is just a detail, and it's just the step after you just look at the design and decide what you have to do. So most of the times we receive something like this. This is a completely random design on wireframe of a design, and it looks something like this, which is of course the same site and same video that I showed yesterday, so I didn't have to record another one. But you receive something like this. This is actually the site, not the design, but I'm a good guy, so it's the same. And you have to turn this into, okay, so this is I have a complex layout, several complex layouts, a big site to develop, so how do I approach that? And this is the same if it's your first Volto theme, if it's your 10th or whatever. The reasoning is always the same. Of course, you get used to it, but it's always the same. Of course, everything that is going to be discussed here is how I do it and my suggestions, but you're free to, of course, approach it however you want to, but still. So an overview of how I prepare for it. So, of course, you need to prepare the base theme for it. So basically, this overview is helps me to prepare a skeleton of what I need to prepare, to do in order to achieve this analysis. And in order to understand what I have to estimate later on when somebody needs to be paid for this project, because that's, of course, ultimately what we want to do. So we need to take into consideration, we need to prepare a base theme. We have a wonderful Volto site generator for that can be used. And of course, we need to take into consideration base preparation, so customization of variables. And there are some things that are repeated throughout the whole site usually, which are header and footer and maybe other base elements. I don't know, you want to have buttons that look all the same throughout the site, you take that into consideration and stuff like that. If you develop all of this stuff, you have a basic Volto theme that looks somewhat like its design, because you have an header, you have a footer, and you have basic Volto content and blocks and stuff like that. And that's a good starting point. On top of that, usually, most of the times, you might have content types with their content type views. and of course blocks, and which is in my experience the biggest part of the work, especially the development work. So you start with base elements. So okay, what do I need to do to implement a header like this one for the site? And I'm not going into the details because that depends on design, but I need to, okay, so I need to have the logo, I need to prepare the menu. Is it a drop-down menu? Is it not a drop-down menu? How does the search button work since you don't have a search input here? Do I need the login link? Is it multilingual site? All of these decisions need to be made. All of these things need to be clarified in order to have to prepare your work properly. And the same goes for the site footer, of course. For example, do I just write all this text in my component file, or do I need a control panel in order for the client to edit this, which is the biggest concern usually in my experience. And then we come to the more site, to the part that's usually different from site to site. So starting from content types, sometimes we still need to use custom content types, additional content types for our work. So usually what happens, I'm talking about views here because we're talking about a theme for Volto. I'm not talking about, of course, creating a content type, especially nowadays. Most of the times you can just create a content type and add the blocks capability, and if you need some additional data to it, and then you're done. But exactly what can happen with content types? You usually have two possible scenarios. It has a custom view, which is fixed, and the user has to just fill in the form, and you see, and then they get the view with the, let's say, old style view with everything where the designer set it. Or you might have a page-like view with blocks that might have some different things. I don't know, you might have some fixed parts, or it might have a default set of blocks, which is not just the title, which is the page default. Of course, you need to take into consideration things I mentioned earlier on, which is you might need custom widgets because you might have a few extra fields on your content type, and you might have custom data, which, as I said, requires some backend work, and of course you might need to take that into consideration into your view. In both situations, you might need to take that into consideration because you might have, for example, you might have a page with blocks in order for the user to enter custom content, but still have some fixed portions of the layout of your view, depending on the data or depending on the content, for example, and stuff like that. For example, one of the simplest uses of a custom content type that I can think of, also from the site I still use as an example, the site I presented in my other talk yesterday. So this is not the site, this is the UI design as a screenshot, that's why it's in Italian. I wouldn't be that, and Latin, I wouldn't be that mean to you. So this is the first part of one of this page, and this is most of the rest of the page. So why am I showing you this one? This is a page that was designed to show the end user a job offering that this company is posted on their website. So it has a few custom data. It has the expiry date just below the title, and it has, especially the blue button there is the button that you need to apply. And there is a custom behavior when it's clicked. And so this small exercise is, how do we proceed? So what do we need to, what is the list of the things we need for this content type? What's the difference between this view and the simple page? So as I said, there are a few additional information we might need to have. For example, the date, the expiry date of this job opening. But also, we can see actually there's one special thing, which is the breadcrumbs are not above the blocks. So there's something more to think about, there's something else to do. And also the title is in that gray block area. It's not below, it's not above. The title's inside that block. Then there's some text I skipped because it's regular blocks. And then there's these custom buttons that I mentioned, which have a behavior that I want to be part of. I don't want the client, the HR in this specific example, to decide the behavior of this. That's part of the code. And then there's other blocks, because that's a simple listing block. So there are a few things to keep into consideration. So for this specific example, we decided to go with removing the regular breadcrumbs, creating a breadcrumbs block, and the other thing is we decided to go with a custom set of default blocks for this content type, which is actually more useful than it sounds like, because it really helps the client understand and be faster in creating these items. Let me show you. If so I tried to create a new item of this type, and this is how it looks like. So we removed the title block by default because we have a custom one. We added a breadcrumbs block in there, an empty text, and another custom block with the buttons. So these 4 blocks is our new array of default blocks for this content type. But this is something we decided and then suggested to the client and discussed with them for this specific content type beforehand. Then implementation is, it's just a detail, especially knowing there's this good feature in Volto by default. And that's what you can and should do for each custom content type, in my opinion. And then after the content types come the blocks. So the specific parts of this content type and every page and everything else. So with the blocks options come tons of possibilities, because blocks can be anything. You can literally do anything with blocks. So how do I approach a design that is filled with different options? Because most of the times you get a whole lot of pages designed, and you need to extract the blocks from there. Or you can work with the designer when available to extract the blocks from there, but still you need to get the different building blocks. And all of this is needed, let me repeat that, in order to make that list that you will need to transform into a price for somebody someday. And so what you need to do is, in my opinion, look at the blocks and try to find common behaviors among those blocks, even if they look slightly different. Try to find blocks that can be the same block and have just a different configuration. Try to find those that look similar, but in how the designer intended them to work are actually different, which is a not so uncommon pitfall. But those that are actually that behave similar, can be just a single configurable block. One suggestion that I can give you that I did this once because I read it in some blog post from a designer a few years ago, and this wasn't for a Plone site. It was for a actually standalone application, but works the same. I had all the designs printed on paper, and then with my scissors I cut all the different building blocks, and then I put them one on top of the other, gave names, organized, and yeah, that's basically, once you do that, you have visually in front of you everything you need to build. And if the project is big, if the work seems overwhelming, that might help, because it's a visual separation of everything you need to build, and then you can start writing numbers and ideas and all of those. Don't do that every time. Save some paper when possible, just in case. And yeah, so especially there are two cases that I'm going to discuss later. Understand with the designer, or when needed and possible with the client, which blocks are regular teaser blocks and listing blocks, and which are just custom functionality or a bunch of text that needs to have a special layout, which is usually the case. Because that's the first level of separation, I don't know, for the lack of a better way to say that, among blocks. So I have a few examples here, because this particular website, this particular use case had a lot of this. So this is, yeah, some of the blocks the designer gave us. I mean, this is pretty straightforward, of course. That it's the same with several configurations. And we had like 10 of these pages with separate configurations. But also this one. This is kind of small. The text is not needed for you to read, but it's how we received it, which is actually useful, because they realized they had the same blocks with slightly different configurations, and they prepared the configurations for us. But still, it's the same with slightly different configuration. Even the small blue corner is a configuration, is a checkbox. And also this one, and I could go on with other 10 or 20 of these. And yeah, so even by dividing those into these slides, it's easier to analyze and decide how to proceed. So what are the kinds of blocks that usually is interesting to keep into consideration? So there are, as I said, teaser blocks and listing blocks are a special case usually, and then there can be any kind of custom blocks for any kind of need. So teaser blocks are simply blocks. A teaser block is a block that shows information from a specific item you have to pick. It's the most simple implementation of a teaser block. And yeah, it's usually very straightforward and easy to understand and to use. And I wanted to specifically mention this, and I'll repeat this later on, because most of the times we try to, and also designers actually, especially if they don't know the CMS, most of the times they try to build something that is incredibly good looking for the end user, and sometimes we forget that there is somebody who has to actually enter the content on the website. So this is something I try to take into consideration in this, while preparing this, and it should be taken into consideration all the times. So this one is, the teaser block is usually very straightforward and easy to understand and to use for the people that have to enter the content, I mean. And they can have several variations. You can have several type of aspects of look and feel for a teaser block, and you can have that in your site, even if it's not in core Volto yet. I know it will be, and I know everybody builds one or reuses one every time. And one of the reasons why this is not in the core yet is that it can have performance issues. So take this into consideration as well when you think on how to build the theme. While on the other hand, there are listing blocks which show content from a query string search. This is also pretty straightforward for all of us to understand. We always had collections, and then listing block has been here like for a couple years, 3 years, I believe. So this block also usually needs more than one variation in a website, because oftentimes you have the latest news, the next events, and stuff like that. And this is very powerful because query string criteria allow a lot of filter combinations. So I personally like to solve a lot of my problems with listing blocks. And yeah, because most of the times there are those kinds of situations. So latest news is my favorite, for example. And I like the listing blocks so much that sometimes I find tricks in order to make it work, because categorization and subjects are not always needed for the end user. The designer doesn't always include them, so they're still in my toolbox. So why not having a highlight category and use that to put some specific news in my homepage and save some calls to the backend, to REST API, save some back and forth. Because it can, I believe it's probably too bold, less performance issues, but it can be more performant than using multiple teaser blocks. It can be. It depends on a lot of factors. Examples of listing blocks are, this all come from the design, so you can have a listing of services offered by the company. You can have latest news with all sort of custom templates. Also this one, I still call them templates, but it's variations. Sorry, Victor. And yeah, so it's all of this usually requires just the development of the variation, because the listing block is there. And if you need extra indexes, extra metadata, it's just backend work, so let them do their job. I like to keep them awake with some stuff to do from time to time, because otherwise you know Volto, right? And so yeah, okay. So one thing that I like to say here is also there are usually regarding other custom blocks. So anything that is not a teaser and not a listing block, you might receive any weird and complex stuff from designers. But if we need to make it happen, don't be afraid to propose your solution, which if it's slightly different, if it solves the same use case, and still looks good, because sometimes you need to work with the other stakeholders and make it happen, right? But with custom blocks, there is no limit to imagination, of course, and that's why I said that. And most of the times, the limits is more easily reached with the budget than with the imagination of a good designer. So yeah, for example, I have a few custom blocks from this site here, which we found interesting. Some easier, some less easy, but still it's usually just a few widgets and HTML and CSS. So these are some more, just to show that really designers can think of anything and it's good. And I don't want to be I don't want to be a limitation for them. I want, if needed, just the budget to be a limitation for them, but I don't want to be one. Also this one with accordions inside tabs, inside the block, inside, I don't know. Which this happened. Even if this is design, this happened. And so yeah, and this is, as I said before, oftentimes you don't have a design so on how to add or edit the blocks. You just have it for the view. And with custom blocks, this is especially a problem from time to time, because it's easy to have a lot of boxes with text and the background image, but how does your client fill all those content in? Keep that into consideration for two reasons. One is you have to deliver a good product. The second one, you want to get paid for that work as well, and not just to build the HTML and CSS that the final user will see. So yeah, don't forget your client is also a user, because your client's user is the end user, but you have two kinds at least. And keep the UX of both users, well, especially the ones who have to edit, in mind. And so with all of these taken into consideration, try to reuse existing widgets. It's basic economy, right? So you have a lot of core widgets, but I want to mention, once again, it's not the first time, for example, Volto React Table widget, but there's a lot of add-ons provided for Volto, which you can find in the awesome Volto repository. So yeah, this is my overview on how, in my opinion, projects should be approached. So what I do when I receive a design, and they need to turn that into several things, because at the end, in the end, you need to turn a design into numbers, meaning hours. You need to build that. You need to turn a design into a definition of what needs to be done and of when the project is ready for deployment. And that's the tough part. Implementation is just a detail. Thank you. Any questions?
You mentioned, first of all, thanks a lot for the very interesting talk. And I saw lots of similarities between how we handle things at Kid Concept and you folks, obviously. One thing that I was wondering about, and I'm not sure if you can share that, most likely not in any detail, but how you do the financial calculation. Do you run them on top of blocks or on the entire project? Did you ever try to like really keep that separated? And do you have a classification there of any kind?
Okay, yeah. So all of the parts that I analyzed here, so blocks and content types and all the basic preparation and all those separate parts are added usually to a spreadsheet or stuff like that. And then for all of those, numbers are put separately. And then it's a matter of our commercial people talking to the client, of course, on what's the best way to present those numbers. But yeah, all those numbers are separate in our calculation usually, even for each single block, because it also helps us in organizing the work. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks for a really great introductory talk there. Have you ever encountered a client requirement for block where you said, okay, this block really looks nice when it's in the design, but these are 12 separate text fields and 15 select boxes. Let's not do this. And how do you approach that? How do you communicate that?
That's me thinking this. That's the question, if I get the question correctly, and having to say that to the client.
Yeah, have you had that?
I'm not sure if I actually had that, but for sure what I would try to do is try to propose a simpler solution, or a solution that involves using more blocks, because actually adjacent blocks can work and look the same for the end user. And it depends on the kind of block, and yeah, it depends. Also, sometimes I ask, when it looks like a lot of text, a lot of items, I ask, do you want an object list widget? I mean, I don't say that, but I think of that, and I ask, do you want to insert any number of text items? And then it's much easier for me to implement, or something like that. Depends, of course.
So one of the screenshots had this the very small text in 2 different colors on the right bottom, and different text on the left, different sizes, and my mind was going.
This one?
No, very much earlier. Whether like, yeah, this one to the left.
Oh yeah.
That triggered me. I thought maybe not.
Okay, this was actually easier to implement, because this, can I go? No, the bottom part of that is luckily for us, and that's the first thing that we wanted to clarify with the customer, with the client, is what is that? Where does those information, where does all of that information come from? And only by asking that, they told me, oh no, yeah, that's information you get from embedding our widget from an external info. And then it's okay, then it's fine. But that's actually not one block. And I didn't want to implement the same block that we have in the first and third case, but with an extra embed. That's just an embed block that you add after the block. So that's the smart thing to do, in my opinion. So I didn't implement an additional embed block with text and buttons and stuff. Just remove the margin between the blocks.
Okay, no questions. Thank you.
Thank you.